Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind, and today we are going to introduce you to Naveen Rao, who's the Vice President of Artificial Intelligence at Databricks. He leads the company's generative AI strategy, research and development, and spearheads Databricks' efforts to democratize AI through data, governance, and machine learning solutions. Early on, he held roles at Qualcomm as a neuromorphic machines researcher and was an assistant vice president at ITG, where he designed algorithms in transaction cost analysis. In 2016, he sold his first company, the AI software platform Nirvana, to Intel. And in 2021, he founded Mosaic ML, a leading generative AI platform known for its MPT large language models, which Databricks acquired in July 2023. Databricks is a data and AI company. More than 10,000 organizations worldwide, including Block, Comcast, Condé Nast, Rivian, Shell, and over 60% of the Fortune 500 rely on the Databricks data intelligence platform to take control of their data and put it to work with AI. Thanks for coming on the show, Naveen.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Can you walk us through your career for the benefit of the audience?
Sure. It's a circuitous one, so bear with me. I actually did research on neuromorphic machines, things like that, as an undergrad.
Okay, what is neuromorphic? I have to be the guy to ask because I'm not. What does
Okay.
that mean exactly?
Broadly, it means mimicking certain aspects of the brain or neurons at some level to try to build a machine that's like the brain. So neuromorphic, kind of like neurons or shaped like neurons. Back then when I was doing it, I was following some of Carver Mead's work, which was actually using analog circuits to mimic the behavior of neurons from an electrical standpoint. It was actually pretty cool work. I think it's still very cool work. Potentially leading to computing circuits that could be super efficient and things like that. So that was back in the 90s. I'll date myself a little bit, but I graduated undergrad in 1997. I came out to Silicon Valley at that point, right before the dot-com boom. And I was actually going to Stanford while I was working. I was a computer architect. Like I actually worked at Sun Microsystems on their microprocessor, the UltraSpark chips. Learned a lot while I was designing the microprocessors there, and actually got a lot of autonomy as an early career engineer, which is really great. Pretty cool culture at Sun. Dropped out of Stanford and actually went to a startup back in 1998. I never finished my degree at Stanford. I loved independence and being able to try new things and kind of fail on my own. I think that was a bit of a personality trait. I liked Sun, but after a year of it, I was kind of like, well, I want to do more. I wasn't allowed to do more. So I went to a startup in this configurable microprocessor space, designed a chip there, went to another company, another startup that was doing digital signal processing. This is all before Wi-Fi. It was before 5G and all this stuff. And so after 10 years in industry, I had designed multiple chips for specific purposes, for general purposes. And my real love, my heart was still in how can I make a machine intelligent? There was one fact I learned in undergrad. Our brains burn 20 watts of energy. Everything we are is 20 watts of energy. And so we weren't even close to that. Even, now we're still not close to that. We're talking hundreds of megawatts for these big AI computers. And there's still something very much missing. So in 2005, I made the decision to actually go back to grad school and finish a PhD in neuroscience. And so in 2007, I actually matriculated. I had a kid and a half, meaning my second son was born during grad school. And, most of my family thought I was nuts. I had a really great career as a senior engineer or a staff engineer. Also been a manager. But really, I just felt like I needed to do more in life. I always use this analogy of if I look back in 50 years, on my life, did I feel like I did something meaningful? And I didn't feel like I was on that path. So, quit my job, went back to grad school. Grad school was awesome. I actually really loved it. I did everything from a lot of machine learning and applied math, dynamical systems, but then also I learned how to do neurosurgery. I trained monkeys to do tasks. I recorded neural signals during their behavior and actually used machine learning to decipher what kind of computation is going on in the brain. After that, combined with my computer architect background and software background, I worked briefly as a quant. That's the ITG thing you highlighted there.
Mhm.
Hated my life, was not happy about this. I did it because I was going through a divorce and needed to pay the bills. um, then I actually got a job as a researcher at Qualcomm. And this was actually kind of coming full circle. It was applying neural techniques to computer architecture, neuromorphic architectures, and actually filed a number of patents there, did some really cool work. That's right around the time that deep learning started becoming interesting. So 2012, if you recall, was the time when a neural network actually won the ImageNet competition of image classification. This was a watershed moment in the whole AI field. Really, that's kind of what kicked it all off. I was at Qualcomm at that time. We were like, whoa, that's really cool, because there were all these other methods we were looking at. So I saw this as something much bigger than I think a lot of people did. I didn't see it as just some algorithm or workload. It was like, no, this is a whole new way to describe computation. Let's go build a new computer architecture around this. And keep in mind, this was 2014 when I actually left Qualcomm to start Nirvana. No investor had seen a hardware startup in 10 years. So hardware startups, for those that aren't initiated in it, they basically were really big in the early 2000s with networking and the internet boom. And then basically many of these companies went belly up and a bunch of investors lost their money. And so by 2005, there were no more hardware investments. 2009, I think, is when Mark Andreessen said software is eating the world. Like everything moved to software. So I come up and I'm like, hey guys, now's the time to go build some new hardware. And most investors are like, what the hell? No, we're not going down that road, So it was pretty hard. We raised a $300,000 seed round. This is back when seed rounds were seed rounds, from a bunch of investors. Actually, Sam Altman was one of them. And we kind of got going then, started doing some early work. I didn't get paid. We had a band of really devoted people who cared about this problem, and then eventually raised an A round of 3.3 million. Okay, tiny numbers. Eventually, we did raise like 24 million, something like that, later on. But by 2015, then a couple of other companies had started, and AI had become more of a central topic. Like when I started in 2014, no one knew what deep learning was or neural networks. 2015, that started to become a narrative in the VC community. Then we got acquired in 2016, so 2.5 years after founding, for 400 million. That got a lot of investors interested, of course. And now hardware started to become front and center. Whole bunch of hardware startups came on the scene then. NVIDIA kicked into high gear, started to build the Tensor architecture. We were trying to compete with them at Intel. Intel had a lot of structural problems. And as we know, NVIDIA kind of won that race for now. But I quit Intel in 2020, wanted to look at how we can actually use hardware more effectively by being much more clever on the algorithmic side. Paired up with Han-Lin Tang, who became my co-founder at Mosaic, and also Jonathan Frankel, who published a paper called the lottery ticket hypothesis. We built Mosaic at the end of 2020 and really got it going in January of 21. Started to build a business. ChatGPT happened. 2023, our revenue exploded as a company. We went from 0 to 20 million basically in 5 months. And then acquisition happened last year. So
That's such a wild story. Can I go back to the monkey part of all this? So because I think for regular people outside of your ecosystem, you wouldn't think, oh, you're using monkeys to figure out how to do AI. So
yep.
Can you how did you bridge that? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think studying. Okay, we have an existence proof of the most amazing computer that has ever been built in the universe, or not in the universe, in the Earth at least, is our brain. So understanding how brains work, I think, is actually quite important. It doesn't mean we have to mimic every detail, but we should understand the concepts. And computational neuroscience is really about understanding the concepts that underlie computation in the brain. If you think about an animal takes in information from their senses, or sight or hearing, touch, etc., processes it, comes up with some sort of representations of the world, uses that to formulate hypotheses on how to find food, how to find mates, how to accomplish certain goals in the world, and then figures out action to take to implement those. So really, the way we look at a brain as a neuroscientist is as a computer, taking input in, processing it, driving outputs. It's not so dissimilar, really. And so, can we uncover concepts there of how it's done, how these representations are learned, how computation is accomplished, that we can apply to synthetic systems?
So how can you tell that they're doing it and then get data from it?
This is a whole field. It was really covered in 1947. Researchers called Hodgkin and Huxley. They uncovered that neurons do what we call spiking. They actually did this in a giant squid, not a giant squid, a squid giant axon rather. So they could see that the neuron, there's a main neuron in a squid that they could electrically record the signals. They see it's sort of quiescent and does this big deviation of voltage that has like a very characteristic shape to it. And they uncovered some mechanisms of why that is, and also uncovered that information can be transmitted through the rate of those signals we call spikes. The spike rate communicates information, or the timing of the spikes communicates information. So that was really where computational neuroscience was born. It represents something about the world. And actually, our brains build computation around lots of neurons spiking with each other and interacting. We can record the spiking in a behaving brain, like we implant electrodes into the brain of an animal. We record the activity, and we actually correlate that with external stimulus or movements, and we can actually see how information about the world is being transformed into movements.
All right. Don't make fun of me for this, Naveen.
It's all right.
When you go back to your wife and your kids and you explain that I'm working with a squid and monkeys to do this, do they think like, all right, your dad is nuts? Something he's like, how was it unusual at that time to be doing these things, or was that kind of just, all right, that's a Silicon Valley thing and this is, commonplace?
I think for Silicon Valley people, it's pretty unusual. Neuroscience had been around for a long time. There were people doing what we call electrophysiology for 100 years at that point, but a very small, tiny set of people. Not a lot of people doing it. It was interesting to see, actually, at the beginning of this AI wave that started around 2012, a number of folks were actually neuroscientists or computational neuroscientists. So a lot of people at the precursors to Google Brain were neuroscientists. I knew several of them. My co-founders at Nirvana were both neuroscientists. My co-founder at Mosaic is a neuroscientist, Hanlon Tang. He was also a neuroscientist. So there's a lot of transferable skills that I don't think most people saw, in the thousands kind of range. But really, that's the basis of this. The artificial neural network, deep learning, whatever, those all took inspiration from neuroscience. Jeff Hinton was actually more of a neuroscientist. Yoshua Bengio has looked a lot at biological systems. So has Jan LeCun. All of these guys were actually really rooted in what we could observe, which were brains, right? Brains were the best computer out there. What are they doing differently? Can we actually extract some principles from how brains do computation?
Now, you're an actual neuroscientist, PhD in neuroscience from Brown.
Yeah.
This might seem obvious now looking at your resume, but why did you pursue that career in industry rather than academia, right? You're schooling Jack and I quite well. If you were to tell me, hey, this is actually Professor Rao, I wouldn't bat an eyelash.
So it's funny because I actually loved academia. When I did my PhD, I actually finished it pretty fast, like 3 years and 9 months. And I was considering going into academia. What's funny is I guess I was infected by Silicon Valley in a sense. Like I grew up in Silicon Valley from the beginning of my career, right? And I'm an engineer at heart. And what's funny is I actually have been both a scientist and an engineer. And I actually really understand the difference now. Like most people kind of conflate the two. Scientist and engineer, kind of the same thing, right? Not really. Very different. Okay. Engineers are applied scientists, you can call it, where you're taking concepts and you're basically making them work in the real world. Scientists are uncovering new concepts and love that side of it, but I love to build. I really subscribe to that point of view of that which I cannot build, I do not understand. The Richard Feynman sort of thing. So if we can build something, we actually understand the concept. So to me, it wasn't sufficient to just go and try to understand concepts and build science around it. I actually wanted to say, okay, there's a concept. Can we exploit that concept to do something useful and meaningful in the world? Our influence in the world, our agency in the world comes more through products. Like technology and science, if it doesn't express itself through products, it doesn't impact the world really, right? I mean, you can say a paper really impacted the world, and it can, because it guides the way people think. But really, the main influence comes through products. When people use a technology that was developed because of science, that science has had a massive impact on the world.
I'm still trying to process all this. So how do you think by having your background that gave you a competitive edge because other people weren't doing the same thing as you were? Was that helpful in terms of scaling up your businesses because you had this lane? It wasn't a very crowded lane. And then
In a sense, yeah. I think that's true. I think, it also depends on your advisor and what they emphasize, all of that. My advisor was very big on communication. A good thing that you learn in academia is how to effectively communicate. Our brains are sometimes a mess, and it takes some effort and time to boil that down into a narrative that's actually easy to communicate, and it can land a message. My advisor, he always said, like, every pixel in your slide deck needs to have meaning. Even if it's empty, that has meaning. And being very clear about what you're trying to communicate and what you're not trying to communicate was important. But I think that helped me immensely. I really learned how to crystallize my thoughts and make them have more impact. That helped me talking to VCs. Like, if you look at our early decks, myself and the other founders in Nirvana were all PhDs in neuroscience. And, our decks looked like academic decks. It didn't look like a typical company pitch deck at that time. Yeah, we had some basic market analysis, but really it was about the concepts that were going to drive this forward.
So how do you convince people? How do you convince venture capitalists, investors? I imagine back then, 10 plus years ago, they were like, all right, who are these dorky, academia people? They want to raise a lot of money. How did you convince them? Say, no, these are the guys and women who know what they're doing. Was that a hard sell to get the VCs and get the investor community on board?
I mean, it was interesting because I think you can benefit from the fact that Silicon Valley is built out of a bunch of geeky people who cared about technology, who cared about that science. You look at all the most iconic companies out there. The birth of Silicon Valley came from PhDs in physics, So I think we have those roots, those cultural roots in Silicon Valley. And so the set of investors who will listen to you is smaller. Really, the one that kind of allowed us to get going really and led our Series A was Steve Jurvetson at DFJ. Steve is the geekiest geek you'll find. Super smart guy. He's one of these people, I think he finished Stanford undergrad in like 2 years or 2.5 years or something like that. Off the charts intelligent. And, it's funny because the first conversation I had with him, I actually remember it vividly. And I remember exactly where I was in our office. He and I just started talking about numeric representations and stuff like that. And I was like, I was talking to an investor. What? And I was sending him papers and he was highlighting things, asking questions. We had this back and forth like that. It was very much about the deep technical stuff. It wasn't about TAMs and, market opportunities and channels. All those things are important. But if you don't have the technology, those things don't matter. And I think Silicon Valley culturally was born out of that. People cared about technology. They loved it. All the other stuff followed. So I think we came full circle in a sense that, we started from technology. We went down this path where people were, call it the MBA types, who were looking at market channels and this and that. And then AI kind of brought it back. We went back to the roots. It's back to the technical folks. And we're seeing that even today.
I'm going to push a little bit because there's some out there that look at the current excitement about AI and this crush of startups right now in 2023, 2024 is kind of the exact opposite, where you have these really nerdy roots, and now there's a lot of people chasing a supposed gold rush.
Yeah.
Help us navigate that contrast in terms of people that are like really into it for the tech, really into it for the concept and building something new, versus folks that are just going into it because it's the next new thing.
It's inevitable because the next new thing is always going to be big. And the same thing happened with the .com stuff, right? There were a small set of geeks. I was one of those. I remember vividly when I first downloaded NCSA Mosaic which was the first web browser in
Wow.
1993. I was a freshman building scripts and stuff to go and comb Gopher and all kinds of stuff. So, I was definitely in that geek camp, and I thought it was really amazing stuff. Then I started to see like people advertising .com on TV. It happened like maybe 1996, around that time frame. And I'm like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
And then you started to see all these people come in because they saw there was money. Then the crash happened in 2000. Those we'll call it I don't know, gold rushers or whatever you want to call it. Tourists,
Yeah.
they all left.
Yeah.
Silicon Valley went back to its roots a little bit. I remember living there, and I had a commute. I would come from like near Los Gatos up to like Palo Alto, and I would be on the 280, and all of a sudden the traffic went away. They all went away, right? But it's part of the cycle. Like, you got to generate that interest. It spurs a ton of creativity. And at that time, no one was really making money yet on the internet, but it was all very clear that it was going to be transformational. And it was. And the same thing is happening now. It's okay. There's a lot of people who are in this for the right reasons. And there's a bunch of people that aren't. But those people are not going to build the transformative companies. Maybe they'll build some small business on the side or something. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And the excitement and overinvestment always happens. But really, that's how the cycle works. It's going to come back down. We're going to have that crash. But from those ashes is where the iconic companies will come.
So on that note, where do you think, this is not a fair question because you don't have a crystal ball, but what's the next thing? Let's say, I don't want to say crash, but let's say, okay, just whatever, ran out of steam and now there's the next thing. What do you think that'll be?
I think there's several directions we're going to go. I actually think there's going to be a complete and utter renaissance in defining what a computer is. I think we need to redefine a computer. I was on this kind of path 10 years ago, and it was the right path, but I think we actually have to go deeper down to the physics. And we're doing that to some degree with quantum computers. So we can actually do these in a classical sense, but I think that's one area. I think robotics, making AI work in the physical world, is going to be something we'll see more of. I mean, automated cars have been going for 10 plus years now, autonomous vehicles, and we're going to see a lot more of that, making things work in a humanoid fashion or non-humanoid fashion that is actually useful for our lives. I think synthetic biology is another huge area. AI is going to help with every one of these things. It's a foundational technology to it. Synthetic biology is a massive amount of information and interactions. I don't think a human brain can actually grok it, nor should it. And we can actually build models that could potentially do this. Can we start to actually modify ourselves to interact with robots in more interesting ways? This is like 50, 100 years away from now, but like, I think we'll start to engineer ourselves to interact with robots that we engineer. The meaning of what a human is going to change in 100 years.
But wait, how so? So like, because some people could say right now it's that way. Everyone has the phone in their hand, so it's kind of there. But you're taking the next step. Like, how would that look?
It's going to be a much more intimate interaction. I mean, what I did in my PhD, actually more specifically, was what we called neurointerfaces, brain-computer interfaces. We actually were extracting signals from brains. We did this even in humans, and we could actually drive robotic arms from their thoughts. So we had a human who had been paralyzed from the neck down. They could still think about movement, but those signals could not get to their muscles, so they couldn't move. But this person could actually think about movement, and we could extract those signals and drive a robot. So can we actually start to communicate with each other and with machines and databases in this kind of native way and do more?
Wait. This is crazy because I've seen videos of that, and I was always a little sus. Is this real or not?
Oh,
where you're thinking and you're moving your arm, you're moving this. So you've seen that firsthand. So that's
we were building it. Yeah. So the first version of this was actually not Elon. It was in 2004. It was my lab. I wasn't there at the lab at that time.
Yeah.
I went to that lab because of this work. So this was at Brown, the Donahue. Wow. So this is in 2004. It was a cover of Nature magazine. Nature is one of the preeminent, science publishing venues. If you get a Nature paper, it can make your career. So my lab had gotten the Nature cover, and they have this patient who was on the cover. You can Google it. Nature cover 2004, brain computer interface, and you'll find it. And so that was pretty groundbreaking. We still haven't figured it out. There's a lot of engineering problems that still remain, not to mention all of the AI stuff that hasn't been done yet. But the basis, the components are there, and it's going to happen. And we're going to be able to interact with machines much more intimately. And I think this could actually be an interface that is better than what we're doing now. We're talking, it has a certain bandwidth. Actually, it's higher bandwidth than just talking. You're seeing my face, I'm seeing your face, you're seeing my hands, and et cetera. But if you take all of that, can we build something that's even higher bandwidth by connecting people together, at the neuronal level? Yes, I think the answer is it's 100% possible. We haven't figured it out yet, but we will.
God,
There is no doubt in my mind that future is happening.
All right. If you don't mind, can you indulge us? Because I imagine the audience, they're going to be like, this is like crazy. So what other things, futuristic things that you feel that you're working on, that you see that is going to be revolutionary?
Building the underpinnings of that. I mean, every one of our technologies builds upon the last, I mean, we came up with a way, to express computation 500 years ago on an abacus. But the abacus needed a lot of iterations, and we moved to like relays and this and that. And then we finally settled on silicon. That might change, who knows? But that innovation allowed us to scale this capability, build a ton of products, as I said, exploiting the physics of silicon to build a ton of products, to add a lot of value, to make business processes more efficient. That then led to computer architecture innovations that led to AI. That AI is going to lead to all these autonomous capabilities in the world, is going to lead to the ability to engineer our genomes and to solve some of the very hard problems around making neural implants stable and something we can widely roll out. Again, these are 50, 100-year problems. But each one of these technology innovations and big shifts that go through this boom and bust cycle, it happens constantly. It's just how the world works. But it works. These boom cycles that we're kind of in, or maybe we're on the tail end of right now, spurred a ton of investment, a ton of focus, and basically imagination. Think about the 13-year-old kids who are enamored with what they see in ChatGPT, and they're like, what can I do? That is what it takes for us as a species to keep surviving and moving forward. I think those 13-year-old kids are going to be the ones who build the next big thing, after this cycle. So I think it's about inspiring.
Listening to this, they're really inspired by what you're saying, and they want to get in on the ground floor. They want to get into these industries, but they want to figure out, like, these startups or these companies that they're hearing about, are they actual businesses? And you have the business background, you have the academia background, so you can tell us the technology and the what's from the the not so what's. Can you give us that advice for someone that wants to get into this? What do they do with their career? How do they get that application?
I'll divide this into two paths. There's the standard career advice. How do I go get a job at a great company? How do I go and be part of building some of those things? And then there's, I'll call it the non-traditional and potentially very high impact, which is kind of reserved for crazy people. Okay. I'll just be really clear on that. Like, people thought I was crazy when I went back to get my PhD because it wasn't rational. It's like falling in love. You're not rational. You've got to do something that you believe in to your core and makes you do things that look stupid to most people. You'll see the best, most impactful entrepreneurs, or even most impactful scientists out there, did exactly that. They took a path that everyone thought was stupid. That's true for AI. Like, you look at Bengio and Hinton and LeCun, all of them were kind of laughed at for 15 years of their career in academia. It's like, why are you doing that sort of fringe stuff? Go and do the main thing that everybody thinks is important. But they stayed on it. And they're the ones who led to those nonlinear innovations. You've got to think about something that you really love and you believe in deeply, so deeply that you're going to do things that most people are going to tell you are wrong. And that's the really, really hard part here. Like, when I was raising money for Nirvana, very, very smart people told me I was nuts. Why are you building hardware? Don't build hardware. And they're all very smart. People I deeply respected. And I'm like, oh shit, should I really be doing this? It makes you second guess, but you have to have the conviction. So those really nonlinear things will come from deep conviction. And how do you gain that conviction? I honestly have no idea. You've got to understand and feel something at a deep level. Some of it came from like me loving sci-fi. And I was like, no, we can go and try to crack some of this problem. In the mid-90s, we didn't even think about AI as we think about it now. It was creative algorithms. But can we actually build something better with a neural network? I felt deep in my bones the answer was yes. I could have very well been wrong, and I would have blown a lot of my own personal money and probably not have done so well from a financial standpoint. But like, honestly, that conviction is important.
Is it the conviction of it, but is it also just some trait that people have? They're just able to tune out the public at large that's all saying, no, you're crazy. And it just doesn't phase you and you just do it. Does it take a certain mentality, a certain trait to just go across the grain and say, I'm doing it, I'm right, everyone else is wrong?
It does. And, I'm sure there's a graveyard of people who have had that mentality but have been wrong. So you have to have the conviction.
So selection process.
Right.
So ones who are wrong
You have to be right.
go by the wayside. So maybe some do, some don't. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, it was interesting because, like, when I came into Intel, I never really stayed at big companies for very long because I always found them to be a little bit stifling.
Yeah. Plus, by the way, for Intel, I bought Intel stock like 20 something years ago. I'm right back where I started from.
Yeah, I know.
So we got to do something about that. So,
But it's a mentality, right?
Yeah.
The most innovative companies, you see it at Databricks today. It's a company that's very much on the rise. You see a mentality of how can I make this true? Versus here are all the reasons you will fail. I can always enumerate all the reasons I can fail.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying don't be aware of those things. You need to be aware of those things. But if you focus on them and say, you know what, don't go down that path because here's all the reasons you're going to fail. I got this so many times from people inside Intel. It was just it's a cultural problem.
Mhm.
If everybody's thinking about, I'm not going to do this because there's a chance I'm going to fail, you're never going to do anything. There's always a chance you can fail. Even with the most, strategic, well thought out strategy, you could still fail. But if you really want to do something that's different, of course there's a high chance you're going to fail. Figure out how to not fail. I think that's the key is how do I not fail? Here's all the reasons I could fail. Let's figure out how to cut our way through that. It always reminds me of I don't know, I'm going to date myself again, but the scene in Star Wars when the Millennium Falcon's going through the asteroid field, if you remember that.
Mhm.
And the C-3PO says like the successful navigation of an asteroid field is like 530,000 to 1 or something like that. And Han Solo looks at him and says, "Never tell me the odds." I know how to fail. I know I can hit an asteroid, right? But like, let's figure out how not to hit the asteroid.
You in your career, you've probably hired hundreds of technologists, developers. When you think about the culture, especially at the two startups that you founded, the team that you're leading at Databricks right now, can you walk us through how you craft something like that? Given your experience at Intel and seeing that firsthand, obviously that's one part of it.
Yeah.
But what does it look like now? And how do you think about that?
Yeah, culture is an interesting one because I think first-time founders often, I'll say almost stumble into it. Maybe they had a great culture themselves, like how they work internally, and that diffused out of them into the rest of the team, which is great. Modeling the behavior is a great way to reinforce culture. But I think that the more times you've done it, the more you've led, you actually start to be more deliberate about these things. I think hiring, I can talk about all the technology stuff in the world. And yeah, we all hire smart people. Fine, whatever. But reality, it comes down to how do we work? How do we take bets? How do we nurture those bets into something that could become a product? That culture of innovation is something that I think we have a leg up on still. This has been a problem for companies like Google, right? Google has the most amazing resource in the world, and they're building great stuff now. But some of it happened because of the way culture kind of got contorted and moved. It hurt the company. And I saw this at Intel. Intel literally wrote the book on culture and OKRs and how you build a lean, mean executing machine.
It was that Andy Grove, right?
Andy Grove. He wrote the books. Every company out there, their planning processes, quarterly planning processes, all go back to Andy Grove. I actually don't know a single company that doesn't use some of the Grovian stuff in it. And Intel had a lot of those pieces, but the culture kind of withered and waned and broke over time. I'm talking about Intel because I know it. This is true for many companies out there. So culture is something that we can win on. Hiring is a very key thing. I always tell companies that I invest in or advise, those first 10 hires are crucial. If something doesn't work, act quick, fire them. So fire if something is not working. Don't let it fester because those first 10 people will set the stage for the rest of the company. And you see this at companies like even NVIDIA. I mean, or Apple, those first few people that they still kind of have influence in the way they did things, processes they put in place. So it's really important to get the first 10 people right. And I think some of that's going to come down to your own judgment, bias for action. Okay, don't talk about it, go and do it. Like, I think we need documents, we need a writing culture when we scale, but like really just the mindset of like, hey, I thought about this thing. How do I go make it work or prove it or refute it very quickly? So that kind of idea is actually a very academic idea. Formulate hypothesis, test hypothesis as quickly and as cheaply as you can, and then build upon it, like refute it or support it. Just really action oriented, I think personally is very important. Trying to you need people who are passionate and who care about taking risks early on. I think that people who take risks, maybe even their daily lives, and their hobbies and things like this might be more apt to thriving in a startup environment. And it's okay. There's nothing wrong with people who don't take risks. It's just you probably won't work well in an environment with high uncertainty, because everyone likes to look at the outside and say like, oh, you guys got so lucky. You did this thing and then this market appeared. And it's like, hang on, it's not how it ever works, right?
Right.
You thought you were going to die 5 times before that happened, right? It's like you're in this very uncertain place. It's like I'm looking forward. I'm like, well, I don't know how we're actually going to make a product that has traction. You don't know what that looks like early on, so you have to love that process of trying things, throwing stuff against the wall, and seeing what's going to work. And then when it does work, executing like mad to make that continue to work. It's focus. It's trying stuff, action, all of these things have to come together, and just people who just work hard and focus on this one problem and all want to be together to succeed. That's the other piece of it. I think that the really smart asshole, I'm not going to keep in my org. I've seen that not work. You got to be on the team. So all of that stuff has to work together with team players. We're all on the same team. We're working together. If you're not on that team, I don't care how smart you are, you can't be here. You do have to be tough. And honestly, I made some of those mistakes in Nirvana sometimes, but eventually things righted itself. And I think, like I said, I kind of fell into it because myself and the founders had like a certain work mentality. And some of the early employees. But the second time around, it's just more deliberate about it. It's like, this isn't working. Let's cut it and move on. No blood, no foul. I'm not going to make a fuss over it, but this isn't working. So let's move on. And you see it in the org. Like you take someone who was smart, but kind of toxic, you remove them, the org moves faster. It's miraculous that you were so afraid to fire this super smart person that you remove them and everything goes faster because you just remove this giant source of friction.
Right.
Now we can just go do this thing that we all want to do, right?
I really appreciate these insights, getting that walkthrough and being ruthless about prioritizing what you're interested in, not being afraid to go up against the grain, especially when people are telling you, hey, you're crazy for doing this. I think this is a message that is really going to resonate with the folks listening. So thanks for coming on the show, Naveen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Glad I could share
Thank you.
something insightful for your audience.
Oh, absolutely. This is great. I really appreciate it.
That's it for The Blind Ambition. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.